In November of 1987, the small coastal city of Gulf Breeze began experiencing something happening in the sky. On November 11th, bright blue lights hovered in the air near Ed Walters' house, so he investigated with his Polaroid camera. He took 5 photos, which showed an illuminated object with window-like openings surrounding the outside and a bright light shining from the bottom, hovering above the trees and power lines. He continued moving closer until he was right below the object. It is then, Ed says, a beam of light extended from the craft and began to lift him up. He heard a voice in his head, calm and reassuring, and his mind was filled with a series of images. He does not recall the images or what happened after. His next memory is waking up on the ground. Unsure what to do with his experience and photos, Ed contacted an editor for the Gulf Breeze Sentinel, Dwayne Cook, on November 17th, and told him about the lights and gave him the pictures. Dwayne Cook didn't know what to do with the story. It was not the first time he'd been contacted about lights in the sky. Several people had contacted the paper about unexplained lights on the same night Ed says he took his photos, but Dwayne wasn't sure UFO sightings made for the best headlines. Coincidentally, his parents paid him a visit. He discussed Ed's story with them, and when he showed them the photos, they were shocked. They'd also seen the same object in the sky a few nights before, but hadn't thought to bring it up to Dwayne. With such credible witnesses as his parents affirming there was something happening, Dwayne printed this story on November 19th about unexplained lights in the sky, along with a photo submitted by another witness, not Ed Walters, taken in June of 1986, that shows nearly the same unidentified object that Ed photographed just days before. Once the denizens of Gulf Breeze saw the paper and the photos, the number of sightings increased over the following 6 months. This is to be expected, but many witness accounts gave similar details about the same time and date and size and shape of objects they saw. Even a city councilwoman made a report of seeing an object floating in the sky. The day after the Sentinel printed this story, Ed Walters had a second encounter with the UFO, snapping more photos of an illuminated craft in the sky, and sent those to Dwayne. The Sentinel received photos from several anonymous sources throughout December. Some of these were used to accompany articles about the sightings. On December 23rd, photos delivered to the newspaper showed multiple objects in the sky. December 28th, Ed Walters produced a videotape with 1 minute and 34 seconds of an illuminated object that resembled the same object in his photos, floating in the sky. Between November and July of the following year, Ed managed to capture 37 high-quality photographs of the craft, causing some to wonder if he was creating these alleged encounters himself. Ed has continuously maintained his word that the images are real and he has not fabricated any of his story. The Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, sent several investigators to Gulf Breeze to find out more information about the sightings. They administered 2 polygraph tests and even gave Ed special tamper-proof cameras and asked him to take more photos of the craft. Their investigation concluded Ed is a credible witness and he is telling the truth about his encounters. Dr. Bruce Maccabee, an optical physicist, was hired to examine Ed's photos, the ones he took himself and those taken with the cameras from MUFON. Ed claimed he hadn't much knowledge of cameras and photo developing, which would lend credence to him being unable to doctor or edit his photos, but it was discovered he did know about double exposure techniques, which could explain how some of his photos were created. However, Maccabee found no evidence of tampering with any of the photos he examined. Once the evidence had been evaluated and Ed Walters was found to be credible, sightings continued to be reported to police and the newspapers until the early 90s. In 1990, the Walters moved from their home in Gulf Breeze, and when the next owners moved in, they found a curious item in the attic. Made from styrofoam plates and cardboard, it looked like a model of a saucer-like object with a band of holes cut around the middle, very similar to the object he'd captured in so many photographs. Ed Walters immediately claimed it was created after he'd left the house, intended to discredit him and his account. He signed an affidavit to this fact, but refused to take a polygraph. Discovery of this object spread across the UFO community like wildfire. MUFON sent 2 new investigators, and they, along with numerous other interested parties, flocked to Gulf Breeze with their own self-created models and tried to reproduce every piece of evidence Ed Walters had. Many of them were successful, including the 2 investigators from MUFON, turning Gulf Breeze from one of the most credible long-term UFO experiences on record into a yet ongoing controversy. Ed's claim that the model was made after he moved out of his home was found to be true. The model was determined to be created more than 8 months after the Walters vacated. However, a local teenager stepped forward to say he helped Ed set up some of his UFO photos, but it is unclear which photos or to what extent he assisted. Ultimately, MUFON still finds Ed Walters' testimony and photographs credible, despite conflicting opinions from their investigators. And Dr. Maccabee's original report included his own personal sighting of a red ring of light that pulsed across the sky over Gulf Breeze. These red flashes and rings were reported quite often in the area by dozens of people, including the Gulf Breeze research team, which noted over 170 sightings with multiple witnesses over several years. This seems to add credibility to the idea there was something going on in the skies above Gulf Breeze for nearly 7 years, but the source of the lights was not captured by Ed Walters' cameras. Were these photos by Ed Walters all a hoax? Why was he able to take so many high-quality photos of the same craft? Was the model found in his house used to create his photos? If not, how were so many other researchers able to recreate his photos using a similar item? Is there a reason the skies over Gulf Breeze were full of unidentified activity for a period of time? Does the nearby Eglin Air Force Base have something to do with this phenomena? I have seen this story debunked on several UFO shows, but I find it hard to believe hundreds of people would make up stories that have such corroborating details. What do you think was going on above Gulf Breeze?